Carl Jung discovered that what most people call love is often nothing more than trauma replaying itself. He saw it in patients who fell head over heels again and again, only to end up in the same heartbreak, the same arguments, the same collapse. They thought they were cursed in love. Jung realized they were haunted by trauma. One patient in Zurich in the 1920s made this brutally clear. She had been engaged twice. Both relationships started with the same story. A man who seemed fated, intense chemistry, a connection she swore she could never explain. And both ended with identical patterns of betrayal and withdrawal. She thought she was unlucky. Jung saw something else. He recognized that she was unconsciously re-entering the wound of her father's abandonment, replaying it in every romance she pursued. Jung wrote, "The patient confuses compulsion with choice. What she believes is fate is merely the repetition of what is not yet integrated." This was his warning. The partners you are most drawn to, the ones who feel like destiny, are often the very people who can re-injure your deepest wounds. Think about your own life. Haven't you noticed it? You swear the next relationship will be different. You spot the red flags, promise yourself you'll never ignore them again. Yet months later, you're back in the same storm. Different face, same story. This is not coincidence. This is what Jung called repetition compulsion. The unconscious forces you to replay the past, dragging you back into the wound until you finally recognize it. The disturbing part is how the body mistakes trauma for love. Patients told Jung that calm, steady partners felt boring. They craved the ones who lit them on fire, who triggered obsession, who made them feel like they had finally found the one. Jung saw that intensity was often a mask. What felt like passion was really familiarity. The nervous system recognizing pain it already knew how to dance with. You think it's chemistry. Jung would say it's unfinished business. Modern psychology confirms it. Dr. Harville Hendricks called this the imago match. The unconscious attraction to partners who resemble your caregivers, both in their gifts and in their wounds. You don't just fall in love with who someone is. You fall in love with how much they mirror the people who first shaped you, which means the person who can break you most deeply often feels most like home. This explains why you excuse the lies, forgive the betrayals, minimize the abuse. Your unconscious isn't looking for safety. It's looking for recognition. It's trying to solve the puzzle of your early trauma by dragging you back to it again and again. Every time you say, "But it feels so real," you are describing the gravitational pull of unresolved wounds. Jung was ruthless about this. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That line wasn't philosophy. It was clinical observation. His patients insisted their relationships were destiny. He saw them as unconscious reenactments, staged with terrifying precision. Ask yourself, how many of your greatest heartbreaks felt inevitable? How many people you just couldn't live without ended up hollowing you out the most? This is the trap Jung described. What feels undeniable may not be love at all. It may be trauma, demanding to be recognized. And here is the paradox. The partners who feel calm, steady, even boring, the ones you dismiss because there's no spark, are often the ones who could actually support your healing, but they feel foreign to your nervous system because they don't activate the old wound. Jung's patient described it perfectly. He was kind, but I couldn't feel him. It was as if my heart was asleep. She mistook peace for absence. She mistook calm for emptiness. Jung warned that until you can sit with peace without needing chaos, you will keep choosing trauma and calling it love. The unconscious prefers the familiar wound over the unfamiliar calm. And so long as you mistake intensity for intimacy, you will keep mistaking trauma for love. Jung realized that trauma doesn't just distort how you love, it distorts who you notice in the first place. The unconscious isn't random. It scans every room, every crowd, every dating app profile, looking for the same signal, the familiar wound. That's why you feel that magnetic pull towards certain people. It's not love at first sight. It's trauma recognition. In one of his early lectures, Jung described it this way: the psyche has a compulsion to repeat what is not resolved, as if the soul were trying again and again to make whole what remains broken. The very people who mirror your earliest wounds shine the brightest in your perception. Their presence feels electric because your unconscious sees an opportunity to replay the old story. Consider how it works. A child abandoned learns to equate love with absence. As an adult, they find themselves drawn to partners who are distant, unavailable, always just out of reach. It feels intoxicating because the nervous system recognizes the old pain and mistakes it for desire. Or take a child raised in chaos. As an adult, stability feels dull, even suffocating. But the unpredictable, the volatile, that feels alive. They swear they've found passion. Jung would say they've only found the echo of early trauma. This is why you can't logic your way out of these choices. Patients would sit across from Jung, detailing how miserable their partners made them, swearing they wanted to leave, yet unable to detach. He wrote, "The emotional bond formed by unconscious repetition is stronger than reason. It binds the patient to precisely what destroys them." Modern neuroscience confirms it. Studies on attachment trauma show that dopamine spikes not just in moments of joy, but in moments of unpredictable reward, when love alternates with neglect. The brain becomes addicted to inconsistency. What feels like romance is actually the high of intermittent reinforcement. You think you're in love with them. You're addicted to the cycle. Jung warned that this cycle doesn't just waste years, it erodes identity. Patients who repeated trauma bonds described losing track of who they were. They stopped pursuing their own desires, abandoning themselves to keep the relationship alive. Jung called this the problem of participation mystique, the collapse of boundaries between self and other. The individual fuses with the relationship and becomes possessed by the unconscious drama. One woman described it chillingly: "When he pulled away, I felt like I ceased to exist. When he came back, I felt alive again." Jung recognized this wasn't love, it was psychic possession. The trauma had consumed her sense of self. You may think you're immune, but ask yourself, how many times have you ignored your own instincts because you were afraid of losing someone? How many times have you felt yourself shrinking, silencing your needs, just to keep them close? That isn't devotion. That's trauma eroding your identity. Jung was clear. The unconscious always seeks wholeness. But if you refuse to confront your own wounds, it will attempt to heal them by staging dramas with others. Every attraction becomes an audition. Every partner becomes a stand-in for the unresolved parent, the unhealed childhood. And the more you insist this is destiny, the deeper the unconscious trap becomes. Here's the cruel paradox. The people who could actually love you in a healthy way often feel invisible. Patients would describe meeting kind, grounded partners and feeling nothing. Jung explained that their unconscious couldn't register safety as love because it wasn't trained to. He wrote, "The healthy object feels unreal, while the traumatic object feels alive." This is why so many people abandon good partners and return to the ones who hurt them. But Jung also saw the way out. He believed the first step was brutal recognition, to name the pattern, to admit that what you call love may be trauma in disguise. He told one patient, "You are not in love with this man. You are in love with the wound he awakens in you." That recognition shattered her, but it also freed her, because once you see it, you can no longer unknow it. The spell breaks. The cycle weakens. Attraction loses its grip. Jung insisted that naming the truth is the first act of individuation, stepping out of the unconscious repetition and into conscious choice. So I'll ask you now, who in your life feels irresistible, intoxicating, impossible to let go of, but also repeatedly wounds you? What if the intensity you mistake for love is only the gravity of trauma pulling you back into orbit? Jung warned that trauma doesn't just repeat itself through partners. It recruits the archetypes of the psyche, turning love into a stage play where you play a role you didn't consciously choose. This is why certain relationships feel mythic, larger than life, almost scripted. They are. But the script wasn't written by love. It was written by trauma. In his clinical notes, Jung described how the unconscious casts people into archetypal roles. A partner who neglects you unconsciously embodies the abandoning parent. You, in turn, slip into the role of the abandoned child, no matter how old you are. Another patient found herself constantly rescuing men who were broken, lost, or self-destructive. Jung recognized the archetype of the wounded healer consuming her. Her love was really a compulsion to fix others while ignoring the parts of herself that needed healing. This is what makes trauma bonds so powerful. You're not just dating a person, you're reenacting an archetype. You become the savior, the victim, the abandoned, the redeemer. And the more unconscious the archetype, the more inescapable the role feels. Jung called this possession by the archetype. The lover becomes the shadow of the father. The girlfriend becomes the devouring mother. The relationship ceases to be two people and becomes a drama of the collective unconscious. Think about the roles you've played. Do you always end up the caretaker, the one who sacrifices everything? Or maybe you're always the one begging for love, replaying the script of the ignored child. These aren't accidents. They're archetypal positions your unconscious keeps dragging you back into. Jung documented one case where a man repeatedly fell for women who were cruel, dismissive, and emotionally cold. He insisted he was addicted to strong women. Jung saw something different. The man was unconsciously bound to the archetype of the devouring mother, reenacting his early experience of maternal control. The women weren't chosen freely. They were stand-ins, cast by his psyche to replay a role he had never integrated. This is why it feels impossible to leave certain partners, even when you know they're destroying you. You're not just leaving a person. You're trying to break out of an archetypal drama. And archetypes are older than you. They grip with the weight of myth itself. Modern psychology echoes Jung's insight. Schematherapy identifies life traps that repeat across relationships: abandonment, mistrust, subjugation. These are clinical names for what Jung saw as archetypal forces. You don't just love individuals. You love the role they allow you to play in the unconscious story. Here's the dangerous part. As long as you deny your own shadow, You will attract partners who embody it for you. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The shadow you refuse to integrate will show up in the people you can't resist. You disown your anger, and you end up with someone cruel. You deny your selfishness, and you fall for someone who takes everything. You bury your desire for control, and you find yourself enslaved by someone domineering. The lover becomes the mirror of your unclaimed shadow. You think you're falling in love. Jung would say you're falling into your own unconscious. Ask yourself, what role do you keep playing? Do you always find yourself the fixer, the victim, the abandoned child? What shadow have you projected onto the person you can't let go of? Until you answer, the archetype owns you. Jung saw that freedom comes only when you recognize the role and withdraw your projection. To realize, I am not just the abandoned child. I am also the adult who can choose differently. To admit, I am not only the fixer, I also have wounds that need healing. This act, owning your shadow, breaks the archetypal possession. But here's the paradox. Integration doesn't end the attraction, it transforms it. Once you reclaim the shadow, the same intensity that once destroyed you becomes energy for growth. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole. The relationship no longer consumes you. It becomes a mirror you can use consciously instead of unconsciously. Until then, love will keep feeling like fate, and fate will keep breaking you. Jung warned that the cost of mistaking trauma for love is not just heartbreak. It is the gradual erosion of the self. He documented patients who spent years in trauma bonds and emerged hollow, barely recognizing who they were. Love did not just fail them, it consumed them. One patient described it in chilling words. I gave everything to him, and when he left, there was nothing of me left behind. Jung recognized this as the danger of what he called the superior function turning against itself. When the psyche devotes all its energy to sustaining an unconscious pattern, the individual's own life force drains away. The first cost he identified was psychological isolation. Trauma-bonded patients could not maintain authentic friendships. They grew distant from family, hobbies, and work. Every ounce of attention went to maintaining the unstable relationship. Jung wrote, "The individual possessed by compulsion finds the world narrowing to a single point, while all else fades into shadow." In modern terms, your social world shrinks until your partner becomes both your only source of connection and your primary source of pain. The second cost was identity erosion. Jung observed that trauma bonds dissolve boundaries. Patients described changing their personality, interests, even moral compass just to keep their partner's love. One man told Jung, "I don't know what I like anymore. I only know what she approves of." Jung called this the loss of ego autonomy, the collapse of individuality into unconscious fusion. You think you're loving someone deeply. In reality, you're abandoning yourself completely. The third cost was emotional fragmentation. Jung noted that trauma-bonded patients cycled between euphoric highs and devastating lows, often within hours. Their emotional life mirrored the unpredictability of their partner. They mistook these swings for passion. Jung saw them as psychic disintegration. What the patient calls fire is often merely the burning of the personality's coherence, he wrote. Modern psychology validates this danger. Research on trauma bonds shows that the cycle of intermittent reward, love followed by neglect, activates the same neural pathways as drug addiction. Dopamine spikes during the reunion. Cortisol floods during the abandonment. The brain rewires itself to crave the very cycle that is destroying it. You don't just love them, you're hooked on them. This explains why people in trauma bonds defend their partners so fiercely. Jung noticed that patients who were objectively abused would resist any suggestion to leave. They insisted, "But you don't understand. I love him. I need her. It's complicated." Jung wrote that this resistance was not rational. It was archetypal. The psyche clings to the drama as if survival depends on it, because to the unconscious, it does. The most terrifying cost, Jung warned, was identity dissolution, what he called participation mystique at its extreme. Patients began to lose track of where they ended and their partner began. They absorbed moods, opinions, even physical symptoms. Jung described one case where a woman developed migraines that mirrored her partner's stress patterns. She had so thoroughly merged with him that her body carried his pain. Jung concluded, the danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation. Ask yourself, how much of you has disappeared in the name of love? How many passions, friendships, or truths have you sacrificed just to hold on to someone who kept breaking you? This is the cost of confusing trauma with love. The more you surrender, the less of you remains. Jung believed this was why trauma bonds felt sacred to his patients. They weren't just relationships. They were existential survival projects. The unconscious framed them as life or death dramas because the original wound they replayed was life or death. The child's need for love from a parent who could not give it. Every fight with a partner becomes a reenactment of that primal desperation. You are not just arguing with them. You are begging your past to finally love you back. But here's the paradox. The more you give, the less love you receive. Trauma bonds consume endlessly, but never heal. Jung saw that until you withdraw your projection and reclaim your shadow, the bond will continue draining you. He told one patient bluntly, "You think you will die without him. In truth, you are dying with him." The cost of staying in trauma disguised as love is not just pain. It is the slow annihilation of your individuality. And the longer you remain, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before the bond began. Jung believed the only way to escape the cycle of mistaking trauma for love was not to suppress desire, but to transform it. He warned that if you simply cut yourself off from relationships, the unconscious would find new ways to replay the wound. The solution wasn't withdrawal, it was integration. The first step was recognition. Jung taught that you cannot heal what you refuse to name. When a patient insisted that her obsessive attachment was love, Jung cut her off. You are not in love with him. You are in love with the wound he awakens in you. The room went silent. She later described it as the first time she felt the spell break. This was Jung's point. Naming the pattern dissolves its unconscious hold. Until you say, "This is not love, this is trauma," you will keep reenacting the same story. The second step was shadow integration. Jung observed that trauma bonds often form because you refuse to own parts of yourself. You disown your anger, so you find someone who expresses it for you. You deny your need for control, so you fall for someone domineering. Jung wrote, "What we deny in ourselves appears in our partners as fate. The work is to reclaim the shadow, to admit, I am angry, I am controlling, I am needy, not to be consumed by it, but to recognize it as part of your wholeness. Once integrated, the The shadow no longer needs to appear outside of you in destructive relationships. The third step was rebuilding boundaries. Jung taught his patients the practice of solitude, not as isolation, but as recalibration. He believed you must separate long enough to hear your own voice again. One patient was instructed to spend hours alone each day in silence, writing down what thoughts and feelings truly belonged to her and which belonged to her partner. Within months, she reported, "For the first time, I know what I feel. I can tell the difference between my needs and his demands." Solitude broke the fusion. The fourth step was conscious relationships. Jung insisted individuation doesn't mean rejecting love. It means learning to love without projection. Instead of seeing your partner as your parent, your savior, your redeemer, you see them as they are. This requires what Jung called conscious participation, engaging with others without losing yourself. Modern therapists describe it as secure attachment, a relationship where intimacy exists without possession, where love grows without the fuel of chaos. The final step was transformation. Jung believed that once trauma is integrated, the same intensity that once bound you to destructive partners becomes energy for creativity, service, and depth. He saw patients who, after breaking trauma bonds, became healers, artists, or teachers, using the very wounds that once consumed them as fuel for their highest work. Jung wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters." The same trauma that nearly destroyed you becomes the foundation of conscious love, love that does not enslave, but liberates. But Jung also issued a warning. Integration is not a one-time achievement. Trauma will always whisper. The old attraction will resurface in moments of weakness. He called this the danger of regression, slipping back into the familiar pattern when vigilance fades. That is why he stressed ongoing practice, solitude, shadow work, honest relationships. Integration must be maintained like fire, or it dies. So where does that leave you? If you've recognized yourself in these patterns, Jung would tell you this: you are not cursed in love. You are unconscious in love. And the cure is not to shut your heart, but to open your eyes. The people you can't let go of were never destiny. They were mirrors. Mirrors of the wound, mirrors of the shadow, mirrors of the unfinished story you carried inside. You can break the spell. You can love without replaying pain. But it begins the moment you say the forbidden truth. What I thought was love was trauma. That is the moment the unconscious loosens its grip. That is the moment individuation begins. So ask yourself now, will you keep mistaking intensity for intimacy, trauma for love, fate for compulsion? Or will you take Jung's path, naming the wound, integrating the shadow, and finally choosing love that does not destroy you? Because until you do, your past will keep writing your future. But the moment you see it, you are free to write your own story.